My father removed me from his will, leaving everything to his golden child, new wife. The room went silent. The lawyer looked nervous. And then I started laughing. Everyone was shocked. But to understand why I was laughing while losing millions, we have to go back. It started 3 years ago. My name is Morgan. Morgan Grant, née Calloway. I am 29 years old. I am a nurse practitioner at a small county clinic in rural Ohio. The kind of place where the waiting room smells like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee, where I know half my patients buy their pickup trucks before they even walk through the door. I work double shifts during flu season. I cover weekends when the other NP has family obligations. I do not complain about this. Complaining is not in my vocabulary. Neither, as it turns out, was no, at least not for a very long time. I am not telling you this story so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this story so you understand exactly how a woman who is trained to keep people alive, trained to read symptoms and patterns and warning signs, managed to miss every single red flag inside her own family for the better part of 3 years. The answer is simpler than you'd think. Love makes you functionally blind. Obligation blinds you the rest of the way. My father, Earl Calloway, was the kind of man who could fill a room just by walking into it, not because he was loud, but because of the weight he carried. 31 years on the factory floor at the Route 9 plant. Hands like two worn leather work gloves. A jaw that had never once gone soft. Earl didn't talk much, but when he talked, you listened. That was just the physics of him. The plant shut down on a Tuesday, a regular, unremarkable Tuesday in October. The kind of day that has no business changing your life. Earl walked through the front door of my parents' house at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a cardboard box, coffee mug, framed safety certificate, 31 years reduced, to what fit in a medium-sized box from the break room supply closet. My mother called me that same night. Not my sister Vivian. Me. She never called Vivian for the hard things. Vivian was the prize. I was the tool. Morgan, your father won't file for unemployment. He says it's humiliating. The electric bill is past due, and the water is next. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my husband Ryan when the call came in. Ryan had just come off a 12-hour shift pulling wire at a new subdivision going up outside of town. His knuckles were split from the cold. His work boots were still on because he hadn't had the energy to take them off. He looked at me across the table with the kind of quiet attention that is better than most people's loudest declarations of love. "We can help," he said when I hung up, "but set a number and a timeline. $800 a month. 1 year. That was the plan. The plan I made in my head without writing a single word of it down, without a contract, without a text chain, without any documentation beyond the good faith I was extending to two people who had spent my entire childhood making it clear I was the family's second-tier daughter. I called my mother back. "Ryan and I can send $800 a month until Dad finds something." My father got on the line. His voice was low and tight, the way it gets when his pride is doing all the heavy lifting. "Don't tell anyone. I don't want the family knowing I'm taking money from my daughter." I promised. That was my first mistake. Not the money. The promise of silence. A month later, I was on the phone with Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister, a retired schoolteacher who has the most accurately calibrated nonsense detector of any human being I have ever met. And she mentioned, casually, the way you mention the weather, how relieved she was that Dad's disability settlement had come through, that the family could breathe again. Disability settlement. My father had never filed for disability. He had never filed for anything. He'd told me directly, too humiliating. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and I said nothing. I filed it away in the part of my brain that catalogs anomalies, the same part that flags an irregular heartbeat. a lab value that doesn't align with the patient's reported symptoms, a story that doesn't quite match the chart. I said nothing. I kept sending the money, and I forgot about the timeline entirely. The favoritism wasn't new. It was wallpaper. So constant, so ever-present, that you stop seeing it as a choice anyone made and start treating it as weather. Just the climate of your childhood. Mostly gray, occasionally cold enough to take your breath away. When Vivian graduated college, my parents threw a party. Streamers on the mailbox, a sheet cake from the bakery downtown with her name in buttercream, 40 people in the backyard. Relatives drove in from 2 counties over. My father gave a toast that went 6 minutes long. When I finished nursing school 2 years later, top of my cohort, pinning ceremony and everything. My parents were 3 towns away helping Vivian look at apartments. My mother texted me that evening, "Sorry, honey. Vivian needed us today. We'll celebrate soon." We never did. Then came the weddings. Vivian married Derek Holt. Handsome, sharp-dressed, managed the biggest auto dealership in the county. My father shook Derek's hand at the rehearsal dinner and said, loud enough for the full table to hear, "Finally, a man in this family who knows how to make real money." I married Ryan Grant 8 months later. Small ceremony, borrowed tablecloths, good food. My parents came. At the reception, my father met Ryan for what was technically the first time, turned to my Uncle Frank and, just loud enough for Ryan to hear it, called him Wire Boy. Ryan didn't flinch. He squeezed my hand under the table and kept eating. That's who Ryan Grant is. He doesn't fight with words. He builds things. He repairs things. He shows up every time, without being asked, without needing a thank you. But from that night forward, at every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call, it was always Vivian. Vivian's promotion, Vivian's new car, Derek's dealership numbers, up 15% from last quarter. And Morgan? Morgan's fine. Morgan's busy. Morgan doesn't need anything, except I was the one wiring $800 on the first of every month. Then my father asked for something bigger, and I said yes. Because that's what I did back then. I said yes. He needed a car. His truck had died. He needed a co-signer because his credit was wrecked, and the credit union wouldn't touch him without one. Ryan's jaw tightened across the kitchen table. He didn't say no. Ryan never says no to something I need to decide for myself. But the tightening was its own language. I signed anyway. Then came the church roof. $5,000. The sanctuary on Elm Street had been leaking all winter. My mother sat at Sunday dinner working up tears that arrived on command, like a trained response. The pastor needed $5,000 or the whole ceiling was coming down. Nobody was stepping up. My mother's eyes went liquid. It breaks my heart. I transferred $5,000 to the church account that Monday, under the name Calloway Family, because my mother asked me to. The following Sunday, Pastor Mike Brennan thanked the Calloway family from the pulpit. My mother stood. My father nodded from the third pew. I sat 2 rows behind them and said nothing. And then there was the land. My grandmother, my mother's mother, owned a small parcel behind my parents' house, 4/10 of an acre on Maple Street. The kind of land that doesn't sound like much until you think about what it means to own something clean and permanent in a small Ohio town. Before she passed 5 years ago, she told me and Aunt Ruth both, plainly, the way she said everything, "This land is for Morgan. She'll need it." But Grandma never wrote a will. She believed in the word of family. She believed that the people you loved would do what they said they'd do. She was wrong about that, as it turned out. The deed sat in legal limbo. My parents held the property. Every time I raised the question of a transfer, my mother had the same answer. "Not now, Morgan. You're being selfish." The letter came on a Wednesday. My old apartment, the one I'd had before Ryan and I found our place, still had my name on the mail slot. My friend Jess had the unit now. She called me between my afternoon patients. "Morgue, you got something from First National. Looks official." I picked it up after my shift, sat in my car in Jess's driveway with the engine off, and tore open the envelope. Account closure notice. Savings account ending in 4471. Final balance $0. I stared at it until the streetlight came on. That account was opened when I was 6 years old. My father set it up. A joint account. His name. And mine. Every birthday check from Grandma went in. Every dollar I earned bagging groceries in high school. Every gift from graduation. By the time I turned 18, there was just over $14,000 in it. I had never touched it. It was the floor under everything. The thing I never thought about because I trusted it was there. I called the bank the next morning. The customer service agent pulled up the records in a flat, professional tone, the kind of voice used for delivering bad news to people they'll never meet. The account was closed 7 months ago. A withdrawal of $14,216 was made by the joint account holder. 7 months ago. I did the math twice. 7 months ago was exactly 1 month before Vivian and Derek closed on their new house. I called my mother that evening. I kept my voice in the register I use for difficult patient conversations. Measured, clinical, no cracks in it. "Mom, my savings account, the one Dad opened when I was 6. Someone withdrew $14,000. A pause. Then, what account? The one with my name on it, Mom. I have the letter." Her voice shifted then, not toward defense, but toward offense, the way she always moved when she knew she was cornered. "You're calling to interrogate your own parents after everything we've done for you? Your father and I raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your head for 18 years. A few $1,000s and you act like we robbed a bank. It was 14,000. And it was mine. How much did it cost to raise you? Do you want me to pull out receipts?" I closed my eyes. I could hear her television in the background. A game show. An audience clapping for something. The money went to Vivian's down payment, didn't it? It wasn't a question. I already knew. "I don't know what you're talking about. Vivian and Derek saved for that house themselves. Your father and I helped from our own savings." She hung up. Ryan was in the doorway when I lowered the phone, arms crossed. He'd heard every word. She was just that loud, and the apartment was just that small. He said 2 words. "Enough, Morgan." Not angry, not pleading, just certain. The kind of certain that doesn't come from emotion. It comes from having watched something for a long time and finally deciding you've collected enough data. Something in my chest cracked open, not from grief, from recognition. That night, after Ryan fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator and I wrote it all down. All of it. In columns, with dates. $800 a month, 36 months. $28,800, wired to my parents' joint checking account on the 1st of every month, while they told the extended family it was a disability settlement that didn't exist. $14,216 taken from a childhood savings account and routed to my sister's down payment, while my mother told me the account had been closed for years. $5,000 donated to the Elm Street Church under the Calloway family name, while my mother stood in the congregation and accepted the gratitude of 50 people. A co-signed auto loan, still active, still tethered to my credit score like a ball and chain, while Ryan and I were trying to save enough to buy a house before we started a family. Grandma's land, promised to me, held against me, used as a leash every time I asked. Total, north of $48,000. I didn't write the word revenge anywhere on that pad. What I wrote was 2 words: exit plan. Step 1. The credit union. Remove my name from that car loan. Either Dad refinanced it himself, or I paid off the balance. Remaining balance, $3,200. Step 2. Cancel the automatic transfer. $800 a month. Done. Step 3. Aunt Ruth. The one person in this family whose word lands like a gavel in a courtroom. Step 4 arrived on its own. 3 days later, when my mother texted the family group chat. Cookout Saturday at our place, celebrating Vivian's new house. Then a separate message, just to me. Morgan, come early. Bring potato salad. Help me set up. Vivian's busy with the house. I read it twice. Vivian got the party. I got the prep work and the side dish assignment. I typed back, I'll be there. I have some news to share with the family too. My mother. What news? I'd rather say it in person. A pause. Then, fine. But after Vivian's toast. Saturday is her day. Her day. It was always her day. I set the phone down. I looked at Ryan across the living room. He was rewiring a salvage yard light fixture he'd been saving for the nursery. The nursery we couldn't afford to build yet. For the baby I was 10 weeks along with and hadn't told a single person about. You sure you want to do this there? He asked, without looking up from the wire stripper. I want witnesses. He nodded once, went back to work. I opened my laptop, found the email receipt from my $5,000 church transfer. Sender, First National Bank. Recipient, Elm Street Community Church. Donor, Morgan Grant. And saved it to a folder on my phone. I printed the account closure letter. $14,216. Earl Calloway, joint account holder. I slid it into a plain white envelope and tucked it into my purse. Then I sat back, looked at the folder on my phone labeled Receipts, and thought about Saturday. They had no idea what was coming. They were too busy planning the seating chart for a celebration built on money they stole from me. I made the potato salad. I always keep my promises. They never kept theirs. There is a particular kind of calm that settles over you when you stop reacting and start preparing. I recognized it from the clinic. It's the same stillness a good nurse finds in a trauma bay when everything around her is noise and blood and shouting doctors. That place inside where your hands stop shaking and your mind narrows down to the next right move. One task, then the next, then the next. I found that place the week after the cookout, and I lived inside it for the weeks that followed. I did not post about it. I did not call relatives. I did not fire off texts to Vivian at 2 a.m. or draft letters to my parents that I'd never send. I went ghost, completely, deliberately, surgically invisible. To the outside world, Morgan Grant was doing what Morgan Grant always did, working her shifts, going home, taking care of her husband, growing her baby. Nothing to see, nothing to report. But at the kitchen table after Ryan fell asleep, I was building something. The Monday after the cookout, I drove to the credit union on Main Street at 9 sharp, not 9:15, 9 sharp, because when you are dismantling the financial architecture someone else built around your life, you do not show up late. The loan officer was a woman named Pam, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the quiet competence of someone who has seen every variation of family financial disaster this county had to offer. She pulled up the file without being asked twice. Vehicle loan under Earl Calloway. You're listed as co-signer. Remaining balance is $3,214. I want to pay it off today, I said, and remove my name from the loan entirely. Pam looked at me over her glasses the way people do when they want to make sure you understand the weight of a decision. You understand that once paid in full, the lien is released. The vehicle title goes solely to the primary borrower. I understand. And you're sure? I'm sure. Ryan and I had talked about it the night before. That $3,200 was money we'd been quietly setting aside for the nursery, a crib, a changing table, all the standard issue equipment for a life about to get a whole lot more complicated and a whole lot more worth protecting. We'd figure the nursery out another way. Secondhand, borrowed. It didn't matter. Pay it, Ryan had said in that quiet, final way of his. Buy your freedom. I wrote the check. Pam processed it. She printed the release form and I signed it. Clean signature, steady hand, the way you sign something you've been waiting to sign for 3 years without knowing it. You're all set, Mrs. Grant. I stood to leave. And then Pam said something that stopped me at the door. You know, you're the second Calloway in here this month. I turned. What do you mean? She caught herself, shook her head. I'm sorry. I can't discuss other clients' business. I nodded, walked out into the parking lot, sat in my car with the engine off. The second Calloway this month. My father had been in that credit union recently. For what? A new loan application? A refinance inquiry? Something that required him to walk into a building with my family's name attached and ask for something? I didn't know yet, but I filed it. The way I file every anomaly that doesn't have an explanation yet. Right next to the account closure letter in the growing mental chart I was building on Earl and Linda Calloway. I drove to work. I saw 14 patients. I smiled at all of them. Friday evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of water and called Aunt Ruth. This was the move I'd been thinking about most carefully, because Aunt Ruth was not a weapon you deployed carelessly. She was retired, yes. 32 years in a high school English classroom, 4 kids raised alone after Uncle Bill died of a cardiac event at 53. More composure per square inch than anyone I'd ever met. But she was also the one person in our extended family whose credibility was unimpeachable. My mother had been building a narrative about me for years. The struggling daughter, the ungrateful one, the one who exaggerated and dramatized. To counter that narrative, I needed a witness with clean hands and a long memory. Aunt Ruth picked up on the second ring. Morgan. It's been too long, sweetheart. Aunt Ruth, I need to tell you something. It's not small. A silence, then. Go ahead. I told her everything. Not fast. Not emotional. The way a nurse charts a patient history. In order. With dates. With specific dollar amounts. The $800 a month for 36 months. The disability settlement that never existed. The savings account, $14,200, withdrawn by my father 7 months ago and routed to my sister's down payment. The church donation, the Calloway family bow, my name nowhere on the plaque. The co-signed car loan, the land. I could hear Aunt Ruth breathing on the other end. Slow and steady. The breath of a woman measuring each word against something she'd suspected for a long time. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Your mother told me about a disability settlement, she finally said. He never filed for disability, Aunt Ruth. He never filed for anything. Another silence, deeper this time. I heard a chair creak like she was sitting down heavily under the weight of it. What do you want me to do, Morgan? Nothing, I said. I don't want you to do anything. I just need one person in this family to know the truth, in case it matters later. A pause. In case it matters at the cookout tomorrow? Yes, ma'am. When Aunt Ruth spoke again, her voice had changed register entirely. Not louder. Harder. The voice of a woman who has spent 32 years making teenagers understand that she is not interested in their excuses. I'll be at that cookout, Morgan, and I'll be listening. She didn't promise to speak. She didn't promise to intervene. She just said she'd be there and she'd listen. But anyone who knew Ruth Calloway understood that when she listened, what came next had a way of reorganizing a room. That same evening, I opened my laptop and composed an email to Pastor Mike Brennan. Pastor Mike was the kind of man who had baptized me at 12, married Ryan and me at the courthouse chapel 6 years later, and never once made me feel less than. He was careful with people's privacy. He was honest when it cost him something. He printed his sermons on paper and still used a rotary card file for his congregation's contact information. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of man you call when you need someone to simply tell the truth. Pastor Mike, I wrote, I want to thank you for respecting my privacy regarding the church roof donation, but I'd like the records updated to reflect the actual donor, Morgan Grant, not the Calloway family. I'll explain when the time is right. Thank you for everything. His reply came within the hour. Morgan, I've always known the bank transfer had your name on it. I respected your wishes. I'll update our records this week. Linda invited me to the cookout Saturday. I'll see you there. Then a second email. 3 minutes later. One more thing. Linda asked me to publicly thank the Calloway family again at the cookout for the roof donation. I assume you'd like me to handle that differently now. I typed 2 sentences back. Just tell the truth, Pastor. That's all I've ever wanted. I closed the laptop, walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Not for reassurance. Just to take inventory. 10 weeks pregnant. $28,800 wired from my bank account. $14,000 taken from my childhood. 1 white envelope in my purse. 1 pastor who knew the truth. 1 aunt who was already listening. Then I opened the banking app. Found the automatic transfer. $800. First of every month. Earl and Linda Calloway joint checking. And I pressed cancel. 36 payments. 3 years. $28,800. Done. I didn't cancel it out of anger. There was no anger in it. Not at that moment. I canceled it because I was 10 weeks along with a baby girl, and I could not keep funding people who were going to call her a burden. That's not revenge. That's math. The cookout happened. You already know what happened at the cookout. My father said what he said in front of 35 people. My mother called my pregnancy a burden. The yard went silent. I smiled. I walked to the cooler and got a bottle of water because Pastor Mike's car had just pulled into the driveway, and everything I had set in motion was about to arrive right on schedule. What I haven't told you about is everything that happened after we walked out the side gate. That Monday morning, my father opened his mailbox and found the letter from the credit union. Loan paid in full. Cosigner removed. Vehicle title transferred to sole borrower, Earl Calloway. Which sounds straightforward unless you understand what it meant for Earl specifically. Because now Earl was the only name on a loan history attached to a credit profile that couldn't support a library card, let alone a future vehicle purchase or refinance. Application. The credit union's follow-up notice made it plain. Based on his current financial standing, they recommended he secure a new cosigner or anticipate reclassification on all future credit applications. Nobody in the family was volunteering for that position. Tuesday, my mother checked the joint account. No $800 deposit. She checked Wednesday. Nothing. She called me. I let it ring. She called Ryan. Ryan answered, because Ryan always answers. His voice was polite and immovable, the way a poured concrete wall is polite and immovable. Linda. Morgan said what she needed to say on Saturday. We're not available. He hung up. Not rude. Just done. There's a difference, and Ryan always knows the difference. Thursday, my mother called Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth told me about it later, nearly word for word. Ruth, Morgan is tearing this family apart. She humiliated us at the cookout. She's punishing us for nothing. Aunt Ruth's reply. Linda, you told your daughter you wished she was never born in front of 35 people. Don't call me about betrayal. My mother hung up on her own sister. The call I hadn't expected came Thursday evening, not from my parents, from Vivian. Her voice sounded different. Not the golden child lilt she'd been performing since we were kids. That particular brightness she wore like a second outfit. This was thinner, more careful. Morgan. A pause. Derek says if the down payment came from your account, he wants to pay it back. He won't start our life in a house bought with stolen money. I leaned against the kitchen counter and let that sentence exist for a moment. Vivian, that's between you and Derek. It's between all of us. Another pause. I'm sorry. 3 years of cookouts and side dishes and second-tier seating at my own family's table. 3 years of Morgan's fine, Morgan's busy. Morgan doesn't need anything. And here, on a Thursday evening on the phone in my kitchen, was the first apology I had ever received from my sister. It wasn't enough. It also wasn't nothing. Derek and I met the following Saturday at the diner on 5th Street. Neutral ground, corner booth, coffee between us. He looked tired the way people look when they've spent a week excavating the foundation of something they thought was solid and found nothing underneath it. I want you to hear me say this directly, he started. I didn't know. Vivian told me it was their savings. Years of your dad setting money aside from the settlement. I never questioned it. I believed her because I had no reason not to. I believe you, Derek. Vivian and I will pay you back. $500 a month. It'll take time, but we'll cover the 14. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I'm not raising my kids in a house paid for with money taken from their aunt. That's not who I want to be. I respected that. So I nodded. And then Derek told me something that changed the entire shape of what I was looking at. There's something else, he said. Vivian told me something 2 nights ago. She's been carrying it. He paused, choosing words. Your mother told the extended family, the cousins, the aunts on your grandmother's side, that you'd been struggling with depression, that you were prone to exaggerating things, making accusations. I set down my coffee. She told them this so that if you ever came forward about the money, nobody would believe you. I sat with that for a long time. Outside the diner window, a delivery truck rumbled past. The server refilled someone's cup 2 booths down. Normal life, moving at its normal speed. My own mother had been building a wall around me, brick by brick, whisper by whisper, one quilting circle conversation at a time, so that when the truth finally came out, I would look like the unstable one, the dramatic one, the daughter who couldn't be trusted. She hadn't just taken my money. She had been quietly, methodically, preemptively destroying my credibility. How long? I asked. Vivian says at least a year. A year. While I was filling his prescriptions, while I was writing the checks, while I was making the potato salad. Thank you for telling me, Derek. He nodded. We shook hands. The call that cracked the whole thing open came the following Tuesday, from Pam at the credit union. Mrs. Grant, I hope this isn't an overstep. Her voice was careful, the voice of a professional balancing procedure against conscience, measuring exactly how far duty extended. After you came in last week, I flagged something during a routine account review. I stood very still in the clinic parking lot. Your father visited our branch approximately 3 weeks ago to inquire about a home equity line of credit. A pause. He listed a parcel of land, 4/10 of an acre on Maple Street, as the collateral asset. Grandma's land. My land. The application didn't proceed, Pam continued. The property is still in probate. There's no clear title holder. But I thought, you should know the inquiry was made. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car with the engine off for a very long time. My father had walked into a credit union and tried to borrow against land that wasn't legally his. land that my grandmother had verbally designated for me, land that had been sitting in probate limbo for 5 years while my parents used it as a bargaining chip every time I asked about the transfer. He hadn't just been taking my past. He had been quietly, methodically, trying to mortgage my future. If I hadn't gone to that credit union to pay off the car loan, Pam would never have flagged the inquiry. I would never have known. By the time the probate process moved, by the time anyone was paying attention, my father might have had a lien filed against that parcel that would have made the title transfer impossible. I called Aunt Ruth that evening. He tried to take the land. A long breath on her end. Then, "Call a lawyer, Morgan. Tomorrow morning, I'll be your witness. Your grandmother told me herself what she wanted. I'll say it under oath if I have to." The real estate attorney I reached the next morning was a compact, efficient man named Gerald Marsh, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had spent 40 years turning family disasters into documented legal proceedings. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The verbal designation combined with an affidavit from a credible witness and documentation of your father's unauthorized credit inquiry creates a strong basis for a probate claim we can file immediately." "File it," I said. "I'll have the paperwork ready by end of week." I walked out of Gerald Marsh's office into the October afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing the cold air. The leaves were past peak, rust and brown, starting to let go. The kind of day that feels like an ending or a clearing. My father hadn't just been stealing from me. He had been trying to seal every exit, block every route, make sure that even the one thing Grandma had explicitly set aside for me would eventually be absorbed into the Calloway family estate without a trace. He didn't know I had already filed. He didn't know about Gerald Marsh. He didn't know that Aunt Ruth had already agreed to sign an affidavit. And he had no way of knowing that the loan officer who'd processed my car payoff had, out of some combination of professional ethics and human decency, picked up the phone. The nuclear key, the final piece that made everything else actionable, wasn't a single document. It was the combination. The bank transfer receipts, 36 months documented to the dollar. The account closure letter, $14,216. Earl Calloway joint holder. The church donation confirmation, Morgan Grant, donor of record. Pam's disclosure of the unauthorized credit inquiry, and Aunt Ruth's affidavit signed, notarized, filed with Gerald Marsh's office before the month was out. Every dollar accounted for. Every lie documented. Every exit my father thought he'd sealed was, in fact, a door I now held the key to. Small towns don't need newspapers. They have Mrs. Dalton. By the following Sunday, the story had moved through every circle in Calloway County: the quilting circle, church coffee hour, the checkout line at Harrison's Market. Not because anyone was cruel about it, because 35 people had been standing in that backyard, and 35 people had families of their own. And when you see a man tell his pregnant daughter he wishes she were never born in front of the whole congregation, you tend to remember it. My mother arrived at church the following week in her good coat, walked toward her usual pew, third row, left side, 20 years of Sundays, and found it occupied. 2 women from the choir had arrived early. Nobody said a word. Nobody had to. The acknowledgement. My plaque in the church lobby had been updated. Where it once read Calloway Family, $5,000, Roof Restoration Fund, it now read simply, Morgan Grant. My mother saw it. She took my father by the arm and they left before the first hymn. At the post office, Mr. Henderson ran into my father and offered the particular brand of small-town small talk that lands like a closed fist in an open hand. "Heard your youngest was the one keeping the lights on, Earl. Everything all right at home?" My father said nothing. Got in his truck, drove away. My mother stopped going to her Thursday volunteer shift at Harrison's Market. Too many faces that knew too much. Nobody organized a boycott. Nobody circulated a petition. This wasn't that kind of town. It was simpler and, in some ways, more absolute. The slow, steady withdrawal of social regard, one averted gaze at a time. Their world didn't collapse. It just got smaller. One conversation at a time, one empty pew, one unanswered greeting. The particular loneliness of people who spent 40 years curating what the neighbors thought and now had to live in the neighborhood they'd built. The article ran in the County Weekly the same week the last leaves fell. Local electrician Ryan Grant lands contract for new community center. Half a page. A photograph of Ryan shaking hands with the town supervisor outside the planning office. The biggest municipal construction project the township had funded in a decade, and my husband, the man my father had called Wireboy in front of his wedding guests, was the lead contractor. I bought 5 copies, not to gloat, because I wanted our daughter to see it someday. I went to my 12-week prenatal appointment on a Wednesday morning. The baby was healthy, strong heartbeat, measuring exactly on schedule, already apparently very determined about the position she preferred in the ultrasound. The tech printed me a picture, black and white and grainy, the most important piece of paper. I asked, "Family support system?" I had asked, "Family support system?" I had written, "Husband, aunt." That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Gerald Marsh called 2 days later. The probate filing was in. The affidavit was on record. The unauthorized credit inquiry had been flagged in the file. He expected the process to take 6 to 8 months, possibly longer, but the claim was solid. We were moving. Ryan and I set up the nursery that weekend. Second bedroom of the apartment, barely room for a crib and a dresser, pale yellow walls that Ryan painted in an afternoon. The overhead light fixture he'd wired himself from the salvage yard piece he'd been quietly saving for months. The crib was secondhand from a coworker. The dresser was from the Goodwill on Route 12. Nothing in that room cost more than it needed to. It was the cleanest room I had ever stood in. Every square inch of it paid for, honestly. Every dollar accounted for. Nothing owed to anyone. Nothing borrowed under false pretenses. Nothing taken. My daughter would grow up in a small apartment with secondhand furniture and a father who came home with drywall dust on his hands. But she would never hear the words "another burden" directed at her face across a folding table. I had made sure of that. Now it was time to make sure of everything else. There is a moment in every long con. And make no mistake, what my parents had been running on me for 3 years was a long con, dressed up in the language of family obligation and parental sacrifice. There is a moment where the people running it start to feel safe. That moment is the most dangerous one. Not for the mark, for the con artist. Because safety makes people sloppy. Safety makes people reach for more. And reaching, when you don't know someone has been documenting every single move you've made for the past several months, is how you walk directly into the thing that ends you. My parents reached in November. Gerald Marsh called me on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after we'd filed the probate claim on Grandma's land. "Morgan, I've received a response from your parents' attorney. I was in the clinic break room, halfway through a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago." "What kind of response?" "A counterfiling. Your father is asserting that the Maple Street parcel was verbally designated to your parents jointly by your grandmother, not to you specifically. He's claiming your grandmother's statement to you was conditional, dependent on circumstances that, in his attorney's interpretation, did not materialize." I set down the coffee cup. "What circumstances?" "The argument is that your grandmother intended the land for you if and when you purchased a home. Since you're currently renting, his attorney is arguing the condition was never met." I let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "That's not true, I know. Aunt Ruth's affidavit directly contradicts it. But it means they're going to fight this, and they've retained counsel. Someone local. A man named Briggs. I knew the name. Douglas Briggs had an office on Commerce Street, handled mostly estate disputes and property line arguments between neighbors. He was competent enough, the kind of attorney who won cases based on local relationships and procedural patience rather than any particular legal brilliance. "What do we do?" I asked. "We let it move through the process," Gerald said. "And in the meantime, you keep collecting." That's exactly what I've been doing. What Gerald didn't know yet, what I hadn't told anyone except Ryan, was that I had found something in my father's counter-filing that told me more than his attorney intended to reveal. The filing listed my father's current assets as part of the standing argument for why the land should remain in my parents' names. It was a standard procedural move, designed to establish that Earl and Linda Calloway were responsible stewards of the property. The document listed the Maple Street parcel, the family home on County Road 7, and one other asset, a business entity, registered in the state of Ohio, filed 4 months ago, EC Fabrication LLC. I sat with that for a long time. E.C. Earl Calloway. My father, the man who had told me he was too proud to file for unemployment, too humiliated to let anyone know he was taking money from his daughter, had quietly registered a limited liability company 4 months ago, while he was still receiving my $800 a month, while he was telling the family his income came from a disability settlement that had never existed. An LLC is a legal structure. It's not automatically evidence of anything. People form LLCs for all kinds of reasons: side businesses, rental properties, liability protection for freelance work. But an LLC registered 4 months ago by a man with no declared income and a wrecked credit score meant money was moving somewhere. And money moving somewhere, when you've been claiming financial hardship to your daughter for 3 years, means there is a paper trail that someone with a forensic accounting background might find very interesting. I didn't have a forensic accounting background, but I knew someone who did. Her name was Patricia Osei. She worked out of Columbus, 2 hours east. I'd met her through a former clinic colleague whose messy divorce had required exactly the kind of financial excavation Patricia specialized in: the quiet, methodical reconstruction of where money actually went when someone was working hard to make it look like it went somewhere else. I called her on a Wednesday morning before my shift. "Tell me about the LLC," she said, after I'd laid out the basics. "EC Fabrication, registered 4 months ago in Ohio. I don't know the business address. I don't know the registered agent. I don't know what it does. Ohio Secretary of State database is public record," Patricia said. "Give me 24 hours. She called back in 18. "EC Fabrication LLC, she said. "Registered agent is a man named Carl Briggs." A pause. "As in Douglas Briggs's brother." I wrote that down. "What does the LLC do? Technically, metal fabrication consulting? But there's no website, no listed clients, no business address beyond a P.O. box in Milford." "It's a shell, Morgan. A clean one, but a shell." Another pause. "Do you want to know what's been deposited into its operating account in the last 4 months?" "Yes." "I can't tell you that yet. I'd need a subpoena or your father's cooperation to access the actual account records. But I can tell you that the LLC was registered the same month your father's truck was paid off by you, which means whatever financial restructuring he was planning, he started planning it before you canceled the transfers. He knew something was shifting. He knew. Not because he had any information about what I was doing. I had been perfectly, surgically invisible. He knew because my father was not stupid. He was a man who had spent 31 years on a factory floor and survived every downturn, every management change, every round of layoffs until the final one. He was a man who could read a room. And somewhere in October, something in the room had changed, and he had felt it. He had started building a shelter before the storm hit. What he didn't know was that I had already filed the paperwork that would require him to disclose that LLC in the probate proceedings. The moment EC Fabrication appeared in his counterfiling asset list, it became a discoverable entity. Gerald Marsh could subpoena the account records as part of the estate dispute. And if money from my transfers, money my father had been receiving for 36 months under the guise of family hardship, had been quietly funneled into a business account he'd never disclosed to anyone, the conversation stopped being about a piece of land on Maple Street. It became a conversation about financial fraud. I called Gerald that afternoon. "The LLC," I said. "I need you to include it in discovery." A pause. "Where did you find it?" His own counterfiling. A longer pause. Then, in the measured tone of a man recalibrating his understanding of exactly how prepared his client was, "Morgan, I'm going to need you to come in." Gerald's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. It smelled like old paper and window heat. He had a whiteboard behind his desk that he used to diagram things, and by the time I'd been sitting across from him for 40 minutes, it had a lot of things on it. 3 columns: transfers, donations, assets. If the LLC account shows deposits that correlate with the timing of your monthly transfers, Gerald said, drawing a connecting line between 2 items on the board. And if those deposits were never declared as income, which they wouldn't be, because your father has been representing himself as having no reportable income for 3 years, then we are no longer in the territory of a family property dispute. We're in the territory of tax fraud, I said. Potentially? Yes. That determination would be made by the IRS and possibly the Ohio Department of Taxation, not by me. But the discovery request puts the account records in front of a judge, and once they're in front of a judge, everything becomes visible. Everything becomes visible. I looked at the whiteboard. 3 years of transfers, 1 shell company, 1 unauthorized credit inquiry, 1 church donation credited to the wrong family, 1 childhood savings account drained and rerouted. All of it documented. All of it dated. All of it now connected. "There's one more thing," I said. "The counterfiling. My father's attorney is arguing my grandmother's designation was conditional, that the land was only meant for me if I owned a home." Gerald nodded. "Ruth's affidavit contradicts that directly. I know, but I want to make the contradiction public, not just in a court filing. I want it said out loud, in front of people, the way the lie was told in front of people." Gerald studied me for a moment. "What did you have in mind?" The answer came from an unexpected direction. My mother sent a group text in the first week of November. Not to me directly. I was apparently no longer on the primary family thread, a demotion I only discovered because Vivian forwarded it to me with a single line. "Thought you should see this." The text read, "Holiday dinner at our place, first Saturday of December. The whole family. We have some good news to share." Good news. I read that twice. Then I called Vivian. "What good news?" Vivian's voice was careful. "Derek heard from Uncle Frank that Dad might have worked something out with the land, some kind of arrangement with Briggs. Mom's been telling people it's basically settled." Settled. My father, who had filed a counterclaim against my probate petition, who had registered a shell LLC, with his attorney's brother as the registered agent who had tried to borrow against land that wasn't legally his, was apparently telling the family that the whole thing was settled. In his favor. He was planning to announce it at Christmas dinner. He was going to stand at the head of that table with the whole family around him and declare victory over a problem he thought I'd given up on. He was going to use the same room, the same audience, the same family dinner table where he had spent 30 years building his authority, to bury the last thing Grandma had ever meant to give me. I called Gerald. He's hosting a family dinner the first Saturday of December. He's planning to announce that the land dispute is resolved. It isn't resolved. Discovery hasn't even been completed. I know. But he doesn't know what Discovery is going to show. I paused. I'd like to be at that dinner. A long silence. Morgan. He built his whole authority in that room. Every decision, every declaration, every time he made me smaller. It happened at that table. I don't want to take him down in a courtroom, Gerald. I want to take him down in the room where he always thought he was untouchable. Another silence. I can't advise you to do anything that would compromise the legal proceedings. I'm not asking you to advise me, I said. I'm telling you where I'll be on the first Saturday of December. What I'm asking is whether you can have the discovery documents ready by then. The pause that followed was the longest one yet. I'll have them ready, Gerald said. Every page. I called my mother and told her I'd come to dinner. She sounded surprised. Genuinely. Which meant she'd been expecting me to refuse. You'll come? Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss it. A pause. Morgan, I hope this means we can move past everything. I'm looking forward to seeing the whole family, Mom. I hung up. Ryan was watching me from the doorway. We're going to Christmas dinner, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Do you need me to come? I need you to drive. He nodded. Once. The way he always nods when something is decided. The first Saturday of December was cold and gray. The particular Ohio winter gray that settles in around Thanksgiving and doesn't lift until March. I wore the same blue sundress silhouette concept but in winter weight. A dark navy dress, flat boots, my wedding ring. No performance, no armor. Just Morgan Grant, showing up, the way she always showed up. Ryan parked across the street. I sat in the passenger seat for exactly 30 seconds, hands in my lap, looking at my parents' house. The porch light on, cars in the driveway, the silhouette of the family inside moving behind the kitchen window the way families do when they're assembling around a table. You ready? Ryan asked. I've been ready for 3 months. We walked up the front path. I had my phone in my purse, the receipts folder containing every document I'd collected since October. I had a printed packet, Gerald's, discovery summary, the LLC filing, the transfer records, the account closure notice, Patricia Osie's preliminary report on EC fabrication, folded and placed inside a manila envelope that I carried in my left hand. Nobody noticed the envelope when I walked in. Everybody was focused on the food, the kids, the general controlled chaos of a family dinner assembling itself. Aunt Ruth was already there, standing near the kitchen island with a glass of sweet tea, and she looked at me the moment I walked in the door the way a person looks at the specific thing they've been waiting for. Uncle Frank, the Hendersons from church, 4 cousins, 2 aunts from my mother's side who had heard the Quilting Circle version of October's cookout and were watching everything with the careful attention of people who've arrived, knowing this is not going to be an ordinary dinner. Vivian was at the table. She caught my eye and gave me one small nod. Derek was beside her, arms at his sides, jaw set. My father was at the head of the table. He looked up when I walked in. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, not quite wariness. Something in between. The expression of a man who had prepared for a game and is now recalibrating because an unexpected player has just sat down. Morgan, he said. Glad you came. Glad to be here, Dad. My mother emerged from the kitchen with a serving dish, saw me, and manufactured a smile. Everyone's here. Let's sit down. Dinner moved the way these dinners always move. Food passed, conversations overlapping, kids needing things, the low, steady hum of a family that has been performing normalcy for so long it barely requires effort. I ate. I spoke when spoken to. I complimented Mrs. Henderson's green bean casserole because it genuinely was very good. I waited. My father stood at 8:15. He tapped his fork against his glass, a gesture so familiar it was practically a reflex, the signal that Earl Calloway had something to say and expected the room to receive it. The table quieted. "I want to say something," he started, and his voice had the particular weight it gets when he's decided he's won something. "This family has been through a rough stretch, some misunderstandings, some words said in the heat of the moment that shouldn't have been said." He looked briefly at me when he said that, the closest thing to an acknowledgement of October that he was apparently prepared to offer. "But families work things out. That's what we do." He paused, looked around the table with the slow, satisfied survey of a man delivering good news to people who depend on him. "I've spoken with my attorney, and the matter of the Maple Street property is on its way to being resolved. Your grandmother wanted that land to stay in the family, and it's going to stay in the family. In our name," my mother added from her end of the table, unable to help herself. A murmur around the table. Uncle Frank's expression was unreadable. Aunt Ruth sat down, her sweet tea glass. My father looked at me. "I know there's been some disagreement about this, Morgan, but I think once you've had time to think it through, you'll understand that your grandmother wanted what was best for everyone." I let a beat pass. 2 beats. Then I opened the manila envelope. "Actually, Dad," I said, "I'd like to share something with the family, since we're all here." I set the first page on the table. Not dramatically. Not with any particular weight. The way you set a chart in front of a patient when the results are back, and it's time to talk. "This is a transfer record," I said. 36 transfers, $800 each, from my First National account to yours, on the first of every month for 3 years. I looked at the table. $28,800, every dollar documented. The table was quiet. "You told Aunt Ruth it was a disability settlement," I said. "You never filed for disability. I have the transfer records and the bank statements showing no settlement income from any external source. The money came from my paycheck." My mother opened her mouth. I kept going. "This," I placed the second page, "is an account closure notice for a savings account my father opened in my name when I was 6 years old. Joint account holder, Earl Calloway. $14,216 was withdrawn 7 months ago. 1 month before Vivian and Derek's down payment closed." I looked at Vivian. "Derek, you already know this. I wanted the rest of the family to know it too." Vivian's hands were flat on the table. Derek's jaw was set. "This," third page, "is an email confirmation from First National Bank showing a $5,000 transfer from my account to Elm Street Community Church. Donor of record, Morgan Grant, not Calloway family. My name, my account, my money." Mrs. Henderson put her hand over her mouth. "And this," I placed Gerald's discovery summary in the center of the table, where everyone could see it, "is a discovery filing from the probate court proceeding on the Maple Street parcel. As part of that proceeding, my attorney has requested financial records from EC Fabrication LLC, a limited liability company registered in Ohio 4 months ago by Earl Calloway, with Douglas Briggs's brother listed as registered agent." The room did not make a sound. My father's face had gone the color of old concrete. "The discovery request will require full disclosure of the LLC's account activity," I said, "including any deposits made during the period when my monthly transfers were active. If those deposits correlate with the transfers, if my $800 a month was going into a business account my father never declared as income, that's a conversation for the IRS and the Ohio Department of Taxation, not for me." I folded my hands on the table. "Dad, you said the Maple Street land is on its way to being resolved. I agree with that. The probate filing is moving. Aunt Ruth has signed an affidavit. Her testimony directly contradicts the conditional designation argument your attorney filed. I looked at him steadily. Grandma said the land was for me. Aunt Ruth heard her say it. And I have a judge who is going to hear Aunt Ruth say it again, under oath, in open court. My father stood up. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. You come into my house. Your house, I said, that I helped pay for 3 years. Uncle Frank stood up across the table, not toward my father. He just stood up, the way a man stands when he wants the room to know he's paying attention and he is not impressed. Earl, he said, sit down. My father's mouth was open. For the first time in my living memory, Earl Calloway did not have a sentence ready. My mother had gone very still at her end of the table. The performance she'd been maintaining, the careful, practiced presentation of a woman who had it together, who had raised a family right, who stood in church pews and accepted gratitude, was dissolving in real time, and she knew it. And what was underneath it was just a woman who had made choices she could not explain out loud in front of 20 people. Vivian looked at my father. Her voice was quiet and perfectly steady. Dad, is the LLC real? He didn't answer. Is the money real? Still nothing. Derek leaned forward. Earl, I paid for $1,000 of that down payment. Vivian and I covered $1,000. You told us the rest was your savings. His voice did not rise. Was it Morgan's money? The silence my father offered was the most complete answer he had ever given. Aunt Ruth picked up the discovery summary from the center of the table. She put on her reading glasses, the half-moon kind she wore for grading papers, for 32 years, whenever something required her full and careful attention. She read it in silence for a long moment. Then she set it down, took off her glasses, and looked at my father across the length of the dinner table. Earl, she said, your mother-in-law wanted that girl to have that land. I was standing in this house when she said it, and I will stand in any courtroom in this state and say it again. My father sat down, not because he chose to, because there was nothing left to stand for. My mother tried one final time. She turned to the table, to Mrs. Henderson, to the cousins, to the aunts from her side of the family who had come expecting a celebration. Her voice trembled with the practiced precision of a woman who had been using tears as punctuation for 40 years. Morgan is doing this because she's angry. She had a difficult pregnancy, and she's emotional, and she's trying to... Linda. Aunt Ruth did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Stop. My mother stopped. The table was silent for a long time. Someone's child in the next room knocked something over. A distant clatter. The sound of ordinary life, continuing at its ordinary pace, completely indifferent to the fact that in the dining room on County Road 7, the story Earl and Linda Calloway had been telling for 40 years had just run out of road. I stood up. I gathered the pages from the center of the table, every one of them in order, and I placed them back in the manila envelope. Gerald Marsh's office will be in touch, Dad. Respond through your attorney. I looked at my mother. Merry Christmas, Mom. Ryan was already at the door. He didn't say anything. He held my coat. I put it on. We walked out. The door closed behind us. No slam. No punctuation. Just the quiet, definitive click of a latch catching. The cold air hit my face like a clean slate. In my left hand, the manila envelope. In my right, Ryan's hand, warm through his work glove. Steady the way everything about him is steady. We got in the car. He started the engine. The heat came on. We drove home. There is a particular silence that follows the end of a long war. Not the silence of peace. Peace is warm and full. It has texture. This is the other kind. The silence of a battlefield after everything that was going to fall has fallen. Cold. Flat. Oddly quiet in a way that takes some getting used to. That's what December felt like. Ryan drove us home from my parents' house on County Road 7 through 12 miles of dark Ohio highway, and neither of us said a word until he pulled into our apartment parking lot and turned off the engine. The heater ticked as it cooled. The parking lot light threw a pale orange circle on the pavement in front of us. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly, the way you consider a patient's question when they deserve a real answer and not a clinical one. Like I just finished a very long shift. He nodded. He understood that completely. He'd been on those shifts with me, not at the clinic, but in this. Every conversation, every document, every evening at the kitchen table with the legal pad and the calculator. He had never once told me I was doing too much or moving too fast or carrying it too personally. He had just handed me coffee and kept the lights on. We went inside. I put on the kettle. He sat at the kitchen table and pulled off his work boots. Old habit, even on a Saturday night in December. I stood at the counter and listened to the familiar sound of it and thought, this is what it sounds like when nobody owes anyone anything. This is what clean feels like. The first domino fell the following Monday morning. Gerald Marsh called me at 8:45. My father's attorney, Douglas Briggs, had contacted his office over the weekend. He wants to discuss a settlement, Gerald said. I was in the clinic parking lot, engine running for the heat. Outside, the sky was the particular white of a sky that hasn't decided yet whether to snow. What kind of settlement? Full transfer of the Maple Street parcel into your name. Clear title, no conditions attached. In exchange for withdrawal of the discovery request regarding EC Fabrication LLC. I let that sit for a moment. My father, the man who had stood at the head of his dinner table 2 days ago and announced that the land was on its way to being resolved in his favor, had spent the weekend calculating what it was going to cost him when a judge got a look at those LLC account records, and he had arrived at the same number Patricia Osei had arrived at. Too much. What does Gerald think? I asked. I think, Gerald said, with the careful precision of a man who never editorializes, that the parcel was always going to be yours. Taking the settlement gets you clear title faster, without the cost of a full trial, and without the collateral exposure that comes from a protracted discovery process. Collateral exposure for whom? For everyone involved. A pause. Including you, Morgan. Discovery is a two-way process. Your father's attorney would have the right to depose you, to request your financial records, to examine your relationship with your parents in ways that could become complicated. I understood what he was saying. He was saying that a courtroom is a blunt instrument, and blunt instruments don't discriminate about what they break. If I take the settlement, I said, the LLC stays buried. The LLC stays out of court proceedings, yes. What the IRS or the Ohio Department of Taxation does with publicly available information is entirely outside my purview and entirely outside the scope of this agreement. I heard that very clearly. Get me the settlement documents, I said. I'll review them tonight. Gerald had the paperwork on my kitchen table by 6 that evening. Ryan sat across from me while I read every page. Slowly, the way you read something that is going to be permanent. 4 pages. Clear title transfer of the Maple Street parcel, 4/10 of an acre, from the estate of my grandmother to Morgan Elizabeth Grant. No conditions, no caveats, no language suggesting the designation had ever been contested. I signed it with a steady hand. Ryan witnessed it. Gerald filed it the following morning. By Thursday of that week, I owned the land my grandmother had always meant for me. A piece of Ohio soil, 4/10 of an acre, that had been used as a leash against me for 5 years. It was mine now, in the only way that actually mattered, documented, recorded, permanent. Not a promise. A deed. I drove past it on my way home from work that Thursday evening. I didn't stop. I just looked at it through the passenger window. a rectangle of frozen ground behind my parents' house, ordinary and unremarkable in the December light, the kind of thing you'd drive past 1,000 times and never give a second glance. My grandmother had looked at it and seen a foundation for my future. She was right. She just hadn't anticipated how long it would take to get there. I kept driving. The IRS matter moved on its own timeline, the way government processes always do. Slowly, methodically, with a thoroughness that has nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with the mathematical certainty of people whose entire job is finding discrepancies in numbers. I did not file a complaint. I did not make a call. I did not send an anonymous tip. What I did was this. 3 weeks after the settlement, I called Patricia Osei and asked her to prepare a summary of her findings on EC Fabrication LLC, the registration date, the registered agent, the timeline of its formation relative to my transfer cancellation, and submit it as a standard financial disclosure to her own professional regulatory body, as she was required to do under Ohio accounting ethics guidelines when she had reason to believe undeclared business income might be involved in a matter she'd been retained to investigate. Patricia submitted the disclosure. The rest was not my business. Audits are quiet things. They happen in offices, through letters, through requests for documentation that arrive in plain envelopes and require responses within 30 days. They do not announce themselves. They simply begin, and then they continue, with the patient, grinding thoroughness of a process that has no feelings about it whatsoever. What I know is this. By February, my parents' joint checking account, the one that had been receiving $800 from me on the first of every month for 36 months, was frozen pending review. I know this because Vivian told me, on a phone call that lasted 11 minutes, in a voice that had shed every last layer of the golden child performance and was just my sister talking to me like an adult for the first time in our shared history. Mom called me crying, she said. The account is frozen. She can't access anything. Dad won't talk to her about it. He's been in the garage for 3 days. What does she need? A pause. I think she needs a lawyer, Morgan. A real one. That's probably right. Another pause. Are you okay? I was sitting on the apartment porch, wrapped in the heavy wool blanket Ryan kept on the back of the couch for exactly these situations. Cold evenings when I needed to be outside and thinking. The street below was quiet. A neighbor's porch light. A car passing with its headlights low. I'm 8 months pregnant, Vivian. I'm tired. But yes, I'm okay. I'm going to keep paying you back. $500 a month. Derek won't let me stop. I know. Morgan, she started. Then stopped. Then, I spent a long time being their favorite and I never asked why. I should have asked why. I thought about that for a moment. About all the Sunday dinners and birthday parties and family photographs where Vivian shone and I was in the background. About whether she had chosen it or simply accepted it. The way you accept weather. You're asking now, I said. That's something. It wasn't forgiveness. I want to be honest about that. Forgiveness is a long road and I was only a few months into it. But it was a door, left open, with a real conversation on the other side. That was enough for now. My father's financial situation deteriorated in the way that financial situations do when the structure holding them up turns out to have been built on borrowed money and borrowed time. With the account frozen and the LLC under review, the truck payment, the one he was now solely responsible for, the cosigner having been removed 4 months prior, went 30 days past due. Then 60. The credit union sent notices. My father did not respond to the notices in the way the credit union required. By March, the vehicle was repossessed from the driveway on County Road 7 on a Tuesday morning while my mother was inside making breakfast. She called my Aunt Ruth, not me. Ruth told me later, without editorializing, Just the facts. The way she delivers everything. Earl's truck was repossessed. Linda is not handling it well. I did not call. I did not send money. I did not send a card. I sat with the information the way you sit with a lab result that confirms what you already suspected. Not surprised, not satisfied. Just present with what the numbers are telling you. The restaurant in town, the one where my mother had held court at the Tuesday lunch table with the ladies from the quilting circle for 15 years, became uncomfortable. Not because anyone confronted her, because nobody did. Because the conversations she walked into would pause for just a beat too long, resume in a slightly different direction, leave her on the outside of the easy warmth that had always been available to her before. Small-town social arithmetic is precise and unforgiving in its way. It doesn't make scenes. It simply adjusts. My mother stopped going to Tuesday lunches by January. My father stopped going to the post office during business hours. He went early, before 8, when the counter staff changed shifts, and the regulars hadn't arrived yet. I know this because Mrs. Dalton mentioned it to Aunt Ruth, who mentioned it to me, in the same neutral reporting tone they'd been using for months. Just the facts, just the pattern. Earl goes to the post office at 7:30 now. The parking lot is empty at 7:30. He was hiding. Not dramatically. Not in the movies and curtains sense. He was simply making himself smaller, reducing his footprint in the social world he'd occupied for 40 years, contracting down to the dimensions of a man who no longer trusted that any room would receive him the way rooms used to. That was his prison. Not bars, just square footage. Derek and Vivian made their first $500 payment in January, as promised. I put it in a separate account I'd opened specifically for that purpose, not commingled with our regular finances, clean, separate, documented. They made the second payment in February and the third in March, with a note from Derek. On schedule. No exceptions. I believed him. Derek Holt was a man who, when he discovered the foundation of his house had a crack in it, didn't pretend the crack wasn't there. He found out about it, owned it, and started repairing it at $500 a month. That's not a small thing. That's character, which is different from innocence, and more valuable. Vivian and I talked on the phone roughly every 2 weeks through the winter. Not long calls. Not the kind where you excavate everything that went wrong over 30 years of shared childhood. Just calls. Her telling me about work, about the house, about the small, ordinary details of her life. Me telling her about the clinic, about the nursery, about the way Ryan had started leaving a glass of water on my nightstand every evening without being asked, because at 8 months pregnant I woke up thirsty every night at 2 in the morning, and he had noticed, and simply started doing it. He sounds like a good man, Vivian said once, on one of those calls. He's the best man I know, I said. Dad had him figured wrong from the beginning. A pause. Dad had a lot of things figured wrong. We didn't need to say anything else about that. Amelia Ruth Grant arrived on the 14th of February. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair and a grip that the delivering nurse called, with professional admiration, extremely purposeful. She came into the world the way she apparently intended to continue, with no interest in doing things halfway. Ryan cried. I'm telling you this because he would tell you himself, without embarrassment, because he is not a man who has ever been ashamed of knowing what matters. He held her in the delivery room and his shoulders shook, and he pressed his face against the top of her head, and I watched him from the hospital bed and thought, this is why. This exact moment is why I did all of it. Every document, every canceled transfer, every cold evening on the porch working through what came next. This is the room I was clearing. I named her Amelia for my grandmother's middle name. Ruth for Aunt Ruth, the woman who showed up, who said I'll be listening, who signed the affidavit without being asked. Twice. Aunt Ruth drove 2 hours from her house the following weekend. She stood in our small apartment living room holding Amelia in the careful, practiced way of a woman who has held a lot of babies over a long life, and she looked at her for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Your grandmother would have loved her fiercely." "I know," I said. "She looks like you did. Same jaw. Same intensity." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. It surprised me, the way real laughter does when it arrives after a long absence. "Aunt Ruth," I said. "I named her partly for you." She looked up from the baby. Her expression went very still, the way still water goes when something drops into it. "Her middle name," I said. "Amelia Ruth." Aunt Ruth held the baby a little tighter. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, in the quiet, precise way she said things that mattered, "I'll learn that." She already had. Gerald Marsh called in late March with the final piece of news. The probate proceeding had been formally closed. The deed transfer was complete and recorded with the county. The Maple Street parcel, 4/10 of an acre on the east side of my parents' property, was in my name, with no encumbrances, no liens, no contested claims. Additionally, EC Fabrication LLC had been administratively dissolved by the Ohio Secretary of State for failure to file the required annual report. The LLC had existed for 7 months. It had accomplished nothing except confirming, for anyone paying attention, that my father had known something was coming and had tried to move money before it arrived. The IRS audit, Gerald told me carefully, was ongoing. He had no information on its status or likely outcome, as it was an entirely separate matter from the probate proceeding. He wished me well with the baby and said his office would send the final billing statement within the week. I thanked him and hung up. I walked to the window of our apartment, second floor, facing the street. The same window I'd sat beside in October reading that account closure letter in the parking lot of my best friend's old building. And I looked out at the March street below. The snow was finally breaking up, patches of gray sidewalk showing through. A kid on a bicycle, first of the year, wobbling slightly on a strip of clear pavement. Spring was coming. It always does. Ryan's community center contract moved into full construction phase in April. He was on site 6 days a week, managing a crew of 14, pulling permits, coordinating inspections, doing the work that he had always been doing since the first day my father dismissed him as wire boy at my wedding reception. The township supervisor called him. I was told by someone who'd been in the meeting, the most organized contractor they'd worked with in 20 years. Wire boy. Building the town's community center. I thought about my father reading that article, staring at the photograph on his porch, working through the math that wouldn't balance, the son-in-law he'd written off, the daughter he'd wished out of existence, the grandchild he'd never met, the $48,000 and the land and the 31 years of authority, and the truck in the driveway that wasn't there anymore. I thought about all of that for exactly as long as it deserved, which was about 45 seconds, and then I put Amelia in her second-hand carrier, buckled her against my chest, and walked down to the mailbox and back, because the March air was cold and clean, and she needed to be outside. And so did I. The letter from my mother arrived on a Thursday in April. Handwritten, which surprised me. Linda Calloway typed everything, had since the 90s when my father bought her a word processor. But this was handwritten, in her careful schoolteacher cursive, on the pale blue stationery she kept in the drawer by the phone. "Morgan, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know that. But I want you to know that your father and I are working with someone, a counselor at the church. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. About you. About what we did. About what we said. I'm not writing to ask you to forget it. I'm writing because I want you to know that I know it happened, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore. Your father won't write. You know him. But he asked me to tell you that he's sorry about what he said at the cookout. Those words. He asked me to tell you he's thought about it every day. We've never met Amelia. We understand why. We're not asking. We just wanted you to know that we know she exists, and we think about her. I love you. I always have. I know that probably doesn't mean what it should right now, but it's true. Mom, I read it 3 times. At the kitchen table, with Amelia asleep in the bouncer beside me and Ryan's coffee cup still warm from breakfast on the counter. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where I keep important things. Amelia's birth certificate, the deed to the Maple Street parcel, Ryan's community center contract, 5 copies of the County Weekly with his photograph on the front page. I didn't respond that week. I needed to sit with it. The way you sit with a diagnosis that requires a treatment plan rather than a reflexive response. What I knew was this: the door was not locked. I had put a lock on it. Yes. The terms were clear. A therapist's office. An apology said out loud. Not through a letter. In a room. In front of the person they'd wronged. Accountability that didn't happen in private where nobody could witness it. The way their taking had happened in private where nobody could witness it. They knew where to find the door. They knew what the lock required. Whether they would do the work to open it was entirely up to them. The summer Ryan poured the concrete foundation for the community center was the same summer I started drawing up plans for the Maple Street parcel. Gerald connected me with a small construction firm, not Ryan's crew, he was committed through the year, who specialized in residential builds on compact lots. The land wasn't large, but it was enough. A modest house, 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a yard where a child could run, on ground that had been designated for her before she was even born by a woman who had known, with the particular clarity of people near the end of long lives, what her family needed. The build would take 8 months, possibly 10. It would be funded by the Maple Street parcel itself. Ryan and I had taken a construction loan against it. Clean and documented and entirely in our names. Every payment tracked. Every dollar accounted for. It would be a house Amelia Ruth Grant could grow up in, on land that belonged to her before she had words for belonging. A house where her parents would tell her, when she was old enough to understand, "Your great-grandmother wanted this for you. She said so. And we made sure she got what she asked for." That seemed like the right inheritance, not just the land, the lesson underneath it. I want to be honest with you about what revenge actually feels like because the movies have it wrong. It doesn't feel like triumph. It doesn't feel like a score settling, a scale balancing, a wrong made right in any clean or satisfying sense. It feels more like debt retirement. The quiet, unremarkable relief of a ledger finally brought to zero. Not joyful, just accurate. My father is a man who spent 31 years on a factory floor and lost everything he understood about himself when that floor closed under him. I don't think that excuses what he did. I think it explains the shape of it. The desperation that looked like control, the shame that looked like contempt, the fear that looked like my father wishing I'd never been born. My mother is a woman who built her entire identity on what the neighbors thought, and spent 40 years maintaining a performance that required a scapegoat to make the lead actress look good. I was the scapegoat. That is not a small thing. I am not going to minimize it by finding the human explanation for it and calling that forgiveness. But I can hold both. I can understand the human machinery that produced what they did, and I can also document every dollar and file every paper and make every phone call that I needed to make. Understanding and accountability are not opposites. You can have both. You should, in fact, insist on both. What I gained: 4/10 of an acre, a house under construction. $14,000 being repaid at $500 a month by a brother-in-law with more integrity than the family he married into. Clear credit. No co-signed debts. No automatic transfers. A savings account in my own name only, with a balance that nobody else's name is anywhere near. And Amelia Ruth Grant, 7 pounds 4 ounces, currently asleep in the next room with her father's patients and, apparently, my grandmother's jaw. What I lost. The version of my family I had spent 29 years trying to earn my way into. The table where I was always the side dish and never the main event. The $800 monthly fee I was paying to be treated like an afterthought. The silence I had been maintaining to keep people comfortable at my own expense. I did not lose those things in the cookout backyard. I had already lost them, years before. I just hadn't filed the paperwork on it yet. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I've found that's only partially accurate. The cold part is right. You have to let it get cold. You have to let the heat of it, the grief of it, the furious, injured pride of it, cool all the way down to room temperature before you touch it. Hot, it will burn you worse than it burns anyone else. Cold, it becomes something you can handle with steady hands, something you can document, something you can place on a table in a manila envelope in front of 30 people and let speak for itself. But it's not really about the serving. It's about the clearing that happens after. The clean, bare space where all the weight used to be, where you can build something that is entirely your own. A house, a life, a daughter who will never be told she is a burden in front of an audience. That's the part they don't make movies about. The after. The ordinary Tuesday when nobody owes anyone anything and the morning light comes through a kitchen window and your husband is making coffee and your daughter is learning to grab things with her extremely purposeful grip, and the land your grandmother left you is being built on, finally, the way she always intended. That Tuesday morning. That's what it was all for. That's what I got. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story landed close to home, if you've ever been the one keeping the lights on while someone else stood in them, drop a comment. I read everyone. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, share it. Sometimes people are waiting for permission to put down what they've been carrying. Take care of yourselves.